Okay, so we are going to finish up the theories of emotion with two more that are relatively new. I doubt that you'd be asked about them, but you could be. And then we are going to move on to another PowerPoint for today and talk about stress and how we deal with stress. So far we've talked about the two historical theories, James Lange theory, which says that emotion is the product of a physiological change. So there's something in our environment that we respond to that causes a physiological change, such as our heart beating, palm sweating, whatnot. And then because of that physiological change, we experience emotion. Essentially, it says that emotion is specific emotions are tied to specific physiological changes, which is largely incorrect because we know that the same physiological change can be linked with different emotions. We talked about Cannon-Bard, which says that that physiological change and emotion happen simultaneously and are independent of one another. So we experience the emotion and we experience the physiological change at the same time, but they're not necessarily linked. The evidence against this is the fact that people with spinal cord injuries who can't feel their body don't experience emotions quite as strongly a lot of the time as people who don't have those. And then the final theory, which is correct, is called Schachter-Singer two-factor theory, which says that when we are when we are presented with some sort of physiological change, like our heart beating, we give it what is called a cognitive label, which essentially is we decide how we are going to feel about that physiological change. And then from that, we have the emotion. It is essentially a top-down theory of the emotions that we feel are kind of based off of our expectations on our appraisal of the situation and whatnot. So the final two theories, which I have them here together, are two theories by Zajonc, that's not how you pronounce it, but I'm not sure how to, and Ledoux, all right, what is called the low road theory, that's the nickname, and then one by a guy named Richard Lazarus was called the high road theory or cognitive appraisal theory. What both of these say is that emotion and conscious interpretation don't necessarily go hand in hand, and that we don't necessarily need to need to be cognitively aware of something to feel an emotion. Okay, and sometimes emotions come after our cognitive appraisal of a situation. And I'm not going to spend much time on these because they are kind of confusing and I don't want to confuse you too much. All right. The low road for emotion, basically what the low road for emotion says, low road theory says, is that some emotions that we experience are automatic. They take what is called the low road, which is they essentially bypass, they go from the thalamus straight to the amygdala. They bypass the cerebral cortex. And so there is not any cognition involved. This deals mostly with like automatic fears. Like if you see something out, like if you're in the woods and see something out of the corner of your eye and you react to it before even consciously processing what you see movement, automatically think, you don't even think, but your body says snake, all right? And then after the automatic reaction, we assess it, okay? So you can see here in this diagram that I forgot to put on yours, but it's here. You can see that it, rather than coming up to the cortex to think like, oh, that movement there, I wonder what that is. That could be a snake. Okay, it just goes straight from the thalamus to the amygdala to create the automatic fear response. That says automatic fear. Okay, so Ledoux and Zajanc, okay, theirs is automatic emotions that don't involve cognition, right? The high road theory, which is put forth by Richard Lazarus, says that oftentimes we do what is called cognitive appraisal, which is essentially interpreting the situation, interpreting something before before we actually have a physical response or an emotion. Okay, so if we hear the wind rustling in the woods, okay, before we just automatically get scared, we think, oh, what's that sound? Oh, it's just the wind. Okay, then we are perfectly fine. Okay, the physical, and then if we hear the sound, hear the rustling, and look around and see that there's a bear coming through the woods, then that is when we experience the physical response and the emotion, but it comes after the cognitive appraisal. For instance, let's say that you're speaking in front of speaking in front of a group of people, and you look out before you go out there. You look out there, and the place is packed, and you think, "Oh crap! I've never spoken in front of a group of people like this." And then from that, your palms start sweating, your heart starts racing, and then you feel the emotion. But the cognitive appraisal of it comes first. It's almost like Schachter Singer, except with Schachter Singer, you have the physiological change and the cognitive appraisal or the cognitive label at the same time. With this one, the high road, you get it at you get the cognitive appraisal, and then you feel the emotional response. All right. All right. Couple of quick things. They found that there are 7 naturally occurring what are called primary emotions that are displayed in infants. Okay. We have joy, anger, interest, disgust, surprise, sadness, and fear. All right. And these appear to be universal. At least in infants, they appear to be universal. And that's all you need to know about that. All right. So now we are going to move on to the next PowerPoint, which is Unit 8A, Day 4. It's called Stress and Happiness. So, nonverbal behavior and conveying emotions. Okay, we can obviously communicate without talking. A guy whose name you should associate with nonverbal communication, particularly facial expressions, or even the smallest little facial expressions, what he called micro expressions, is Paul Ekman. And Ekman says that even if we aren't openly displaying a very clear facial expression, we oftentimes have our face can give away little things in our face can give away, like just like snarling our lip really quickly or whatnot, can give away how we really feel. But again, it does appear that facial expressions are universal, although the intensity in which they are conveyed is not always universal. Some cultures display more intense facial expressions and more intense nonverbal behaviors than others. And obviously, some nonverbal behavior is not universal, such as giving the middle finger. Okay, giving the middle finger does not mean the same thing in other countries as it does in the United States. Um, Facial expression and behavior's effect on emotion. We mentioned this last class, but there is a phenomenon in psychology called what is called the facial feedback effect. The facial feedback effect is the idea that activation of certain facial muscles can trigger certain emotions. So, activation of like squinting the eyes while you're smiling has been found, or just smiling in general, has been found to make people feel happier. And activation of certain other facial muscles that are involved in frowning have been found to make people feel angry or sad. Now, it's not clear, though, if it's the activation of the facial muscles which causes the emotion, or if it's a top down process that we think, oh, I'm smiling, that means I must be happy. But there is truth to the idea of fake it till you make it. Okay. Smiling when you're unhappy can elevate mood. We also have what's called the behavior feedback effect, which is that our behavior can alter our feelings and emotions, such as striking a power pose, um, sitting in a chair leaned back with your legs crossed, versus sitting in a chair hunched forward with your arms crossed, has been found to people who sit with their legs crossed, lean back, have been found to feel more confident than people who are sitting hunched forward with their arms crossed. Walking with long strides rather than shuffling your feet makes you feel more confident. So, behavior feedback effect, how our behavior affects our emotions, and then facial feedback effect, how our facial expressions affect our emotions. There is a video right here from Brain Games that if you want to find out more about this, you can watch that. All right, so stress and health. I'm going to go through this stuff quick because it is pretty easy. All right, stress is obviously how we respond to events that we see as being threatening or challenging. Okay, stress, and we'll get this on the next slide, but stress very um, is very dependent. How stressed we are is very dependent upon how we interpret it. Stressors are anything in our environment that stress us out, whether it be a test or your parents or your relationship or what, your boyfriend or girlfriend, anything in our environment that stress us out. So one of the things that they found is that stress can either be harmful or helpful, and based off how we interpret stress, what is called stress appraisal. If you have a stressful math test coming up, okay, and you appraise that as a threat of, oh my God, I don't know any of this stuff, I'm dumb, blah, 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 then your response to that is going to be to panic. This type of appraisal causes distress, okay, which causes us to shut down. But then if we have something stressful coming up and we view it as a challenge, we see this one as a problem. But if we view it as a challenge, all right, that helps us get focused and aroused, and we feel that we can overcome that challenge. This is good stress, what is called eustress or eustress. We can compare this to what we learned a couple classes ago, the Yerkes-Dodson principle of arousal, where when we have this when when we are in distress, our arousal levels get too high, causes us to shut down. But when we have eustress, our arousal levels stay moderate, which causes us to perform at a higher level. Some of the things that stress us out, there are a lot of things that stress us out, but some terms you need to know. What are called motivational conflicts. There are more than this, but this is really all I think you need to know. An approach conflict is when we have to choose between doing two desirable things. All right, if you have the option of either dating Emma Watson or Margot Robbie, okay, then like those are two, at least for me, would be two desirable options. Or if you're having to choose between, you know, I don't know why my thing has stopped working. Hold on one sec. Okay, if you have to choose between pizza or burgers, okay, or watching The Office and watching Parks and Rec, all right, those would be approach conflicts. Avoidance conflicts is when you got to choose between doing two things that you don't particularly want to do. Okay, you can either do your homework or you can do your chores. All right, two things that you want to avoid. All right, and so both of these can stress us out. All right, so how do we deal with stress? What is sort of the biological process that happens when we are stressed? This is Hans Sales general adaptation syndrome. And you'll see this abbreviated just GAS. So there are 3 steps. Okay. When we are presented with a stressor, okay, when we are presented with a stressor, the first thing that happens is what is called the alarm reaction stage. Alarm reaction is when we appraise the situation and we mobilize whatever resources. We mobilize whatever resources we have, okay? Whether they are, this might be your body mobilizing whatever resources, diverting energy from certain areas of the body to other areas of the body, or releasing certain hormones, okay? Once we are in the once we are through, once we are at the alarm reaction, we go into what's called the resistance phase, which is when we are in kind of high alert. We are coping. Okay, so when you realize that midterms are coming up, you go into the alarm stage, and then a couple days before midterms, you're in the resistance phase where your body is on high alert. Okay, releasing a lot of cortisol and whatnot. Okay, but our body's resistance to stress can only last so long. We can only exist in this resistance phase for a certain amount of time before our body shuts down. Okay. Eventually, whether it's that day or a month later or whatnot, we are going to go into the exhaustion phase, okay, where our energy is depleted, our body shuts down, and our ability to resist stress goes down. And this is when we often risk disease. because our body's natural ability to fight these things has diminished because it's used up all of its resources. So you can just remember GAS, ARE, okay, alarm resistance exhaustion, general adaptation syndrome. Okay. When we are stressed, we are more at risk for what is called psychophysiological illnesses, what used to be called psychosomatic, but these are physical illnesses that are caused by stress-related issues. Headaches, okay, headaches can be caused by stress. Hypertension, which is high blood pressure. We can develop ulcers when we are stressed, which are holes in the lining of the stomach. And this affects our resistance to disease. The study of this is called psychoneuroimmunology, how the mind, the brain, and the immune system all work together. All right, and then finally, last couple things, um, personality type and heart disease. Okay, type A personality. People with type A personalities tend to be more competitive, hard driving, tend to be more verbally aggressive, anger prone, whatnot. People with type B personality tend to be more relaxed. Okay, they tend to be more go with the flow, a lot of times more creative. As you can assume, type A personality is more at risk for heart disease, which has become one of the leading killers of Americans. Right, and then catharsis. Okay, catharsis is a psychological idea that we can experience emotional release through aggressive action or through fantasy about aggressive action. So if you're mad at somebody, that, you know, if you're mad at your mom and you go up and you slam the door, the idea that slamming the door or punching a punching bag or whatnot can cause what is called cathartic release. All right, and it's thought to relieve aggressive urges. Um, this idea was popular for a long time in what's called the catharsis hypothesis. What they have found is that catharsis can relieve it in the short term, but it actually makes us more aggressive in the long term because we learn that being aggressive makes us feel better for a short period of time. And so it is negatively reinforced. And therefore, we learn to do it more often to release, to try to get that short term emotional release, but we end up becoming more aggressive in the long term. Okay. All right. We are going to stop that, right? Actually, one last thing. All right. Getting into health and happiness. All right. Health and happiness. Some of the things that they look at in terms of our overall health and our overall happiness is what is called our explanatory style, which is just our basic outlook on life. And you all know what these are. Are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? Okay. Optimists, people who have an overall better outlook. People who are optimists tend to cope better with stressors, and they tend to also have tend to have feel as if they have more control over the world. Okay, they experience better health. They generally get better grades. They experience better moods and whatnot. Okay, people that are pessimists. Um, People that are pessimists expect things to go badly. All right, they tend to doubt their own ability and sense of control. If they fail a test, it's because they're dumb. Okay, and a lot of times they think that the world is outside of their control. They think that everything is outside of their control. Okay, so um, your explanatory style has a lot to do with how, with your overall level of happiness. All right, so we are going to cut it off right there, and then we'll finish the rest of that next class. All right.